Good afternoon to you. 506 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up this hour, Kyle Seraphin will be with us, former FBI agent. We'll talk to him about Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, being held in contempt of Congress this week. Get his reaction and get your reaction to everything at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. The left, well, they're running around this week claiming that crime is down in the United States of America. Everything's so much safer. You can leave your doors completely unlocked. It's all fine. Never mind the terrorists being arrested every other day. Here's MSNBC's Christopher Hayes last night.
Look at what has happened with the homicide rate. In 2020, when, Donald Trump was president, he ushered in.
And the left was rampaging in the streets. Remember this? I love this. They claim that any crime that occurred in 2020 is Trump's fault. And it was literally the left burning cities down.
He ushered in, under his presidency, the largest ever one-year jump, spiking 30%. By 2023, the homicide rate had tumbled 19% to 5.3 homicides per 100,000 people. New data from the FBI shows the rate continues to drop off dramatically, down another 26% in the first quarter of 2024 from the same time period last year.
Yeah, he's not alone. All these lefty outlets saying to CNN, violent crime is down and the U.S. murder rate is plunging, FBI statistics show. CBS. FBI quarterly report shows 15% drop in violent crime compared to last year. Well, that's a great story. Is it true? John Lott joins us now. He's the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, and he follows the data closely. John, good to have you back with us, sir.
It's great to have you back too, Vince.
It's great to be here. So what do we make of this, John? All of these headlines tell me that I don't have to be worried at all.
Well, there are real problems with the FBI data that's occurred over the last few years that we haven't seen in the past. There are two measures that we have of crime. We have the FBI counting the number of reported crimes to police. And then we have something called the National Crime Victimization Survey, which surveys 240,000 people each year in order to get an idea of what total crime is, what reported and unreported crime is. And there have been, prior to 2020, these two sets of numbers generally tended to go up and down fairly closely with each other. But since then, they've been going in opposite directions. And in 2022, for example, while the FBI showed a 2% drop in violent crime, the National Crime Victimization data showed a 42% increase in violent crime. And even if you just use the FBI data, it's very clear that law enforcement in this country has collapsed. You look at the arrest rates for the 5 years before COVID for the largest cities over 1 million in population, though this is true across the board. For the largest cities, they had an average arrest rate for violent crimes of 44%. It started falling in 2020, and by 2022, it was down to 20%. That's an over 50% drop in arrests. There was an even larger drop in property crimes. And look, people can go to your CVS and you see there, or the Walgreens, and they see a lot of things behind glass, and they have to go and call up a worker there to go and open it up and stand next to them while they try to read the packages and decide which one they're going to get of something. They know that wasn't true a few years ago. It's not that these companies are doing it just because, they think it's fun to spend the extra money on this type of stuff. They're doing it because otherwise you'd have real theft. And another way of looking at this is that if you look at arrests relative to all crimes, reported and unreported in these cities, only 8% of violent crimes result in arrest, and only 1% of property crimes result in arrest. And and not all arrests result in charges, let alone prosecutions or convictions. But so we have two things here, though. We have reported FBI data going in the opposite direction of our measure of total crime. And people have long known that most crimes aren't reported to police. Only about 42% of violent crimes are reported, only about 32% of property crimes. But it's even worse than that, because the FBI measure of reported crime has been going in the opposite directions of the national crime victimization data of reported crimes. And that's something we've never seen before. They're what we would say perfectly negatively correlated since 2020. When one goes up, the other goes down.
So the crime victimization data is up since 2020. Is that right?
It's much higher now on our latest numbers for 2022 than it was in 2019. It went down slightly in 2020, and then it went up in both 2021 and 2022 by a dramatic amount.
Okay, so that's people reporting that they've been victimized by crime. But the actual,
That's right.
but the arrest data is going down according to the FBI's tracking. So you mentioned a number of factors that have led to that. One of them, as I understand it, is that you have major American cities who aren't even reporting their data to the FBI now.
Yeah, that's one thing. In 2022, for example, you had about 31% of cities that didn't report their data. We don't have the latest numbers yet for 2023, and obviously the numbers for 2024 coming out, there's still going to be a significant number of places. Now, the FBI just doesn't put down zeros in it. They kind of guess what they think the numbers are. But I would argue that they've been doing a pretty poor job, at least what we've been able to look at so far in doing it. But I think there's another factor that's going on there, and that is as arrest rates have plummeted, people are less likely to go and report crimes that are occurring. Whether people think the criminals are going to be caught and punished has some effect on at least some people's decisions whether or not to go and report crimes to the police. If why report a property crime, for example, if you think there's virtually no chance of doing it? And this also gets into why the two measures of reported crimes, not just reported crimes and total crimes, but the two measures of reported crimes are going in opposite directions. So, in the past, if you called up 911, they'd send a police car out. But now they're going to ask you, well, is it an emergency? Is the criminal right there, right now? And in many jurisdictions in the country, if you say, well, no, the criminal's left, they'll say, well, you can come down to the police station and go and fill out a report. But, we have to warn you, it's unlikely much is going to happen to them. And so what happens is that you've made it more costly, more difficult for people to report crime. And so some people are going to say, it's just not worth my time to have to go down there and do the reporting. And so what's happened is I think one of the reasons for the differences in the two measures of reported crimes is that some people just don't understand that simply calling up 911 doesn't put the crime on the reported list.
There's another piece.
You have to have a police report filled out.
There's another piece here about 911 calls that you're making me think about. There's a gentleman on Twitter, on X, called Dave Statter, who tracks some of what's going on in D.C. And he said this past weekend in D.C., the average 911 call was answered in 48 seconds, which is a very long time for a 911 call to be ringing. 48 seconds of the ringing going on. The national benchmark is 15 seconds to be able to answer the phone. 447 callers hung up after waiting more than 15 seconds. So you're talking hundreds upon hundreds of 911 calls that don't even reach a dispatch because people get tired of waiting for the ringing to end.
Right. I mean, you have jurisdictions like New Orleans, for example, where the average response time for the police when they send out a car is over 3 hours.
So what's the point?
We've had,
if it's an emergency, what's the point of waiting 3 hours?
Right. And so what happens is a lot of people give up on reporting. If you just make it more costly for people to report, you're going to have fewer people do it. And another issue is we've had lots of these Soros DAs who are downgrading crimes. So Alvin Bragg, who's been in the news a lot recently, he's downgraded the charges on 60% of his cases, with almost all of those being downgraded from felonies to misdemeanors. And the biggest area that he's doing that is with regard to assault. So aggravated assaults typically involve a weapon, a gun or something, but he's refusing to prosecute criminals for the use of a gun in a crime. And so what would have been an aggravated assault gets downgraded in the FBI data to a simple assault, a misdemeanor, which isn't in the official FBI violent crime data. Whereas with the national crime victimization data, they'll go and ask you about 40 questions about the crime, where it occurred, when it occurred, the characteristics of the criminal, whether you were harmed, how you responded, what the final outcome was. And then they'll ask you whether you reported the crime or not. And the thing is, with the national crime data, you'll say the guy had a gun. And so the national crime victimization data will record that as a violent crime in terms of aggravated assault, even though the district attorney, in terms of the official count, would have downgraded it from an aggravated assault, which the FBI would normally count, down to a simple assault.
So what we're witnessing is the data are being rigged in order to leave us with an impression that crime is down when in fact it's actually up.
It's being rigged to some extent at the local levels, yeah. But there's lots of other problems that are occurring. Just the fact that we have fewer police, the police that are there don't have the experience because we've had large numbers of retirements. We're not getting responses. People don't understand that simply calling up 911 doesn't result in the crime being officially reported. There are lots of issues like that.
So can you address homicide specifically? One of the things I've seen CNN's coverage this week of this particular saga is they claim that murders have fallen 26.4% for the first quarter of the year compared to the same quarter last year. On what are they relying to establish that? And is it true? Is it true that fewer people are being killed by homicide?
Right. Well, look, of all the measures of crime that we have, the homicide measures over time tend to be best. These are very preliminary numbers. It's going to be a year over which these jurisdictions can correct it. And as you've pointed out earlier, we may have a third of these police departments, and many of the largest ones in 2022, for example, New York City and Los Angeles, police departments weren't reporting the data. So, it's preliminary numbers. I wouldn't be surprised, as often happens with these estimates, that the initial ones are moved up over time. And they're having to guess what the numbers are for a large number of jurisdictions that are there. So, but, in terms of reporting the crime, we don't have the same problem with homicides as we have with regard to other violent crimes. But, I'm going to put more weight on it a year from now than I'm going to put on the initial quarterly data that we have.
Got it.
And one thing I will say, and this kind of gets back to something we were saying before, when they say, well, decide whether to send out police officers to the scene, if it's a murder, they'll send out somebody all the time. And so what resources they do have for policing will be concentrated on the most serious crime, particularly if it's in progress at the time. And so if any crimes are going to be solved, if any crimes are going to be dealt with, it's going to be murder. The ones that are just completely ignored now are things like property crimes. And then you have things like aggravated assaults, which, are down the list.
Yeah, but even the murders now, they feel like they're up for grabs. I mean, what was that story from a week ago now of a woman, she carjacks a vehicle right here in Washington, D.C., outside of a hospital. There's an elderly woman in the car. She crashes the vehicle into the U.S. Attorney's office, literally into the U.S. Attorney's office. The woman in the vehicle dies. No murder charges for the carjacker. So it's just, even murders, they feel like they're a bit of a jump ball these days.
It's crazy, some of the stuff that goes on. I'll give you one example. About a week or so ago, there was a case in New York City, in Queens, where two 20-year-olds had gone into a wine store, were trying to steal bottles of wine. The store owner there kicked them out. One of them came back, started hitting and kicking one of the employees there, left, came back, again started kicking and hitting the employee and the store owner, Francisco Valerio. At that point, Valerio shot the attacker there, wounding him. He survived. But the district attorney there charged Valerio with attempted murder. He's facing up to 7 years in prison, whereas the individual who is doing the assault didn't even get charged with assault. Only thing he's being charged with is petty theft. So while Valerio faces, who used a gun, as far as I can see, and was on the video, there's a video of it, in perfectly reasonable defensive gun use, the person who did the assault didn't even get charged with any type of assault.
Insane. The DA should be charged with something in that case. Thank you very much. John Lott, really appreciate your wise assessment of all of this data as always, sir. Good to talk to you today.
Thanks. People can find more at our website at crimeresearch.org on all this stuff. But
yep, that's the place I go, crimeresearch.org. Thank you, John. It is 5:22 now. Let's go to the phones. I've got Todd calling in from Rockville on line 1. Todd, good afternoon, sir. You're on the Vince Gallané Show.
Hey, Vince. How are you?
I'm good, Todd.
Good to talk to you. So I just wanted to chime in here. So I run a neighborhood watch in the North Potomac area. And, the best way to figure out what's going on with the crime rates is to get out on the streets. I talk to the shop owners. I talk to people that run CVS's, Safeways.
Yeah.
And, the crime around here is just incredible. And the crime rate is a big farce because you have to dissect it. And I'll tell you why. You could be in an area like Germantown where crime is going through the roof, but yet the crime rate gets transposed on the entire county, right? So if you've got an area where you don't have a lot of people moving into it, but you have a lot of crime moving into it,
right,
that crime rate is a lot higher, you know? So you cannot look at crime rate. It is a farce.
It's fun with statistics. They're playing around with the data to leave people with a false impression. You're living it. You're dealing with a neighborhood watch. You're talking to business owners. Everybody's panicking about all of the crime they're seeing. And here you have Chris Hayes telling you not to worry your little head. It's perfectly safe. Maybe in his neighborhood, whatever gated community he lives in. For the rest of us, we're seeing it. We really are. Coming up, Kyle Seraphin will be with us in a moment. The FBI, remember them? They're supposed to be dealing with crime. Instead, they've been attacking Biden's political opponents, and Merrick Garland has just been held in contempt of Congress. Kyle Seraphin reacts to that. Good afternoon. 5:35 here. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us today, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. A shellacking last night for the Democrats in that congressional baseball game. 31-11 was the score. The Republicans dominating. Greg Steube, the congressman on the mound for the Republicans, wearing a MAGA hat. It said 45 and 47 on it. Donald Trump's signature right there on the brim. Pitching to Levi Strauss Air, New York Congressman Dan Goldman. Goldman just whiffing pitch after pitch after pitch. I don't know how many at-bats he had, but I watched at least one, and he struck out very easily. He's not a good baseball player. He's terrible at that, too. Yesterday, he was on with CNN's Jake Tapper reacting to the news of Merrick Garland being held in contempt of Congress, deservedly so. And even Jake Tapper said, wait a second, the Attorney General can't just not give Congress these recordings of Joe Biden and Robert Hur. Listen to the exchange.
There was no basis for Bill Barr to withhold the unredacted report from Congress. He could identify none if it were an issue of classified or secret information.
But there's really no basis for the Justice Department to not give the audio recordings to Congress either.
Well, first of all, there is, and I do believe the basis is that it would have a chilling impact on any future cooperation of witnesses who would know they would be recorded and would know that it potentially could be disclosed. And who knows what's in a specific recording? We know what the substance is because we have the transcript. And so there are legitimate investigative reasons why the Department of Justice would not want to turn over. And the Congress has to have a legitimate reason to request these materials.
Well, that was totally incoherent. Another strikeout for Dan Goldman. For more on this, let's bring in Kyle Seraphin, former FBI agent, host of the Kyle Seraphin Podcast, and he joins us on the phone now. Kyle, good to have you back with us, sir.
Hey, Vince. You know what? I was following your sickness. I'm glad to hear that you're well now.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I feel a lot better. Thank goodness. That was.
I went into strep throat right when you were coming out, so that was pretty wild. I
really?
Was like, oh God, I hope I don't have abscesses.
Well, I hope you're feeling better too. I'm appreciative that you're here, Kyle, and I wonder what your thoughts are on this subject. You have Merrick Garland being held in contempt of Congress. The claim is that they just can't release this audio. It would have a chilling effect on future investigations. But that seems like poppycock, given that we've seen the transcript. So unless the audio is different, what are you hiding?
Yeah, for me, it kind of reminds me of that movie Liar Liar with Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
And he says, "Objection, Your Honor." And the guy says, "Well, what's your objection?" He says, "It totally ruins my case." It's like, that's why, because it's just going to make Biden sound like a fool. Look, we have a pretty bad track record of seeing attorney generals being held to account when they're held in contempt of Congress, if people remember what happened with Eric Holder.
Yes.
So this is a ceremonial movement. You know, it's good that they united enough to be able to get the vote in. But at the end of the day, is it going to have any impact? No. And should they disclose the transcript? They already waived the privilege. They gave the transcript. So in theory, unless there's a differentiation between the audio and the written, why on earth would you hide it? It's foolishness. Like I said, I can't believe he was a USA.
And they keep making it sound like, well, this would have an impact on every other investigation everywhere. No, the circumstances here are pretty unique. This is the president of the United States. He's alleged to have stolen classified documents over the course of a long political career. And there was a special counsel investigation into that matter. Robert Hur concluded the guy doesn't deserve charges because his brain doesn't work. And they released a written transcript of their conversation. This case is pretty unique. Normally, you don't get any evidence out of the Justice Department in any case that they don't charge. Here you have, again, the transcript out. Why not just release the audio?
Yeah, it seems totally absurd. The upside is we're in the middle of a campaign season, and all those things are about contrast, right? So we've got the contrast of one guy is going to be held accountable. He was indicted. The other guy is not. The situation for Donald Trump seems much more defensible, the fact that he was the commander-in-chief. And the other guy was a congressman or a senator for a long time and then a vice president and held on to things. And they kind of have a very similar fact patterns. They were negotiating it. One got a consent raid, one got a search warrant. So we're seeing the contrast. America gets to see the contrast. And then we get to see this weird sort of double standard where you can read what we said it says, but you can't hear what we actually recorded. It doesn't work in most court filings. You can't say we're going to keep the recording that we have, but we're going to give you a transcript in discovery. Like I said, once again, a really weird move. A guy who used to be a federal prosecutor. You'd think he understood fairness better.
Merrick Garland has declared himself immune from prosecution, to your point that there won't be any meaningful consequence for him. The Hill had a piece yesterday on this subject. DOJ memo says Garland can't be prosecuted for contempt over Biden-Hur audio. So I guess there are categories of people who are above the law.
That's 100% correct. Look, when we see these things where the government investigates the government and finds the government was blameless in the thing that the government was trying to find out, like it's this circular, self-licking ice cream cone. People in D.C. are familiar with this sort of two-step, this little game that they play. And this is another reason why having an Office of Inspector General or having an internal affairs organization that is going to theoretically suss out the reality of it, it can't hold the people that it actually works for accountable. How are you going to get people that are in an Office of Inspector General if they actually have to answer for prosecution? They can't bring prosecution on their own. So we keep seeing OIG reports from all kinds of different things, whether they be whistleblowers or otherwise, saying, look, we got a real problem here, and then we're going to refer it for prosecution, but it's going to look really bad for Merrick Garland. And I'll just tell you something, Vince, that's kind of funny for me. My original whistleblower claim that I brought forward was that Merrick Garland may have lied to Congress under oath. And this was specifically about whether he was going to use counterterrorism resources against parents at school board meetings. I didn't say you couldn't do that. I'm saying that he said he wasn't going to do it, and then we got a memo saying they would. And when I brought it forward, it's not shocking that DOJ didn't go after their own boss, but that's kind of why we have a problem right now. There's nobody that has functional oversight, and they know it, which is they just act like it doesn't matter. They're just going to shrug it off. So
Congress should defund them. That's the answer. I mean, really, that's the only thing that's left.
We've theoretically got a co-equal branch of government that has one ability. It's the power of the purse, and they keep funding the executive agencies that keep proving that they don't care about oversight.
They're giving the FBI a brand new building. They're ready to sign off on all sorts of goodies.
Yeah, it's $11.3 billion in the proposed budget. That's a lot of money, and the argument should be made is, what are you doing for us with that money? And are you listening to what we're asking? I've got an active FOIA case right now. I'll just kind of tell you this as a kind of an inside baseball, but we know that the Office of General Counsel at the FBI did a presentation to members at the Hoover Building that basically lampooned Republicans and was very disrespectful to Republican members of Congress. They had 7 different presenters that were all attorneys for the FBI's OGC. They all were kind of talking out of turn, and one of the witnesses reported to me that it looked like no adult had reviewed the presentation. We asked for the FBI to give it to us through FOIA. They've just given us our first 90 seconds of it. They redacted almost all of it. And they said, look, we can't give it to you, probably because it's really embarrassing and it makes them look ridiculous.
Yeah, well, embarrassing is not a reason under the law to preclude this information from being shared. But, of course, it is what they do in practice. They redact things for that reason specifically. I have one other question for you. You mentioned about the counterterrorism resources in the FBI, and something that popped up this week that I think matters a great deal is this story of all of the people from Tajikistan who were picked up by the FBI this past week here in the United States and turned over to ICE custody. The idea is that they are linked to ISIS-K. And I can't help but think about what the National Security Division at the FBI is supposed to be doing, which is, again, picking up terrorists. And instead, what they have been doing, which is picking up January 6 protesters ever since. Is that an issue? I mean, is this? Some people claim that they can walk and chew gum at the same time. It seems like a massive distraction of important resources to be focused on January 6th deal.
No, you're very astute with that, right? So there's an opportunity cost. You only have a finite amount of agents. They have a finite amount of hours in the day. And if they decide to go after nonviolent, people who are at a protest or a riot and got rowdy on one day in history and haven't gotten rowdy since then we're not going to be able to look into the 100,000 Afghan parolees that we brought into this country completely unvetted, many of whom simply walked off the bases that they were staying on, Air Force and Army. And we were getting reports of it in real time when I was doing that work out in New Mexico for the FBI. It's like, where do those people go? They're just gone. What do you mean they're gone? They walked out to the road, they got an Uber, and they're off into the ether. So we brought in 100,000 people that way. Who knows who many of them were? And then we have a ton of people coming in over the border at a rate that is too difficult for us to even fathom in normal human spectrum. So, what are those people doing? Yeah, we're going to go after the easy fruit. Look, I remember being in the FBI Academy, and one of the most disappointing things that was ever said is, we only catch the dumb ones. And that means they're going to go after the low-hanging fruit because it's a government job, and they're going to go after the easiest thing. It's actually really hard to get into terrorist networks. Doesn't mean there's not some people dedicated to it, but it's a lot easier to make your statistical accomplishments and keep your job in your file review by going after light lifts like January 6th. And there's a lot of money in it, too. So they're more than happy to keep the budget fulfilled with those cases instead of waiting. We've got a ticking time on our hands. Like I said, between 100,000 Afghans and the millions that came over the border, you think there's not going to be some bad actors in there going to meet up and do some bad things in the next, 12 to 18 months? I'll be shocked. I'm actually shocked it hasn't happened worse yet.
It keeps happening.
And we're already seeing some of these penetrations going on at even Quantico, right? We saw some Jordanians get picked up that were trying to get through the gate. So there are penetration tests that are going on, trying to see what security looks like. You do it unarmed first. That's how you do your recon. There's no major crime there. And then you find out, you send the real bad guys in when they figured out what the situation looks like. So I hope they're on it, but it doesn't look like they are.
Yeah, a lot of problems and a lot of threats out there. Let me get back to Merrick Garland with you for a moment. There's a piece in the Washington Post this week written, under Merrick Garland's byline. The headline is "Unfounded Attacks on the Justice Department Must End." In the piece, he claims that there are all sorts of conspiracy theories and unfair attacks being leveled against the Justice Department. And rather than the Justice Department leading to a collapse in faith in our institutions, instead it's the critics of the Justice Department, like you, Kyle Seraphin, who are making things worse. What do you make of this claim by Merrick Garland?
I love it. It's my favorite. I love it when these guys do this kind of stuff. I'm not sure that he wrote the piece or if he got some underling to write it, but yeah, it's perfect. It's like you can't criticize us. These are these sort of unfalsifiable premises that the Democrats love to deal in, which is like, if you gave us enough power, we could solve the problem. And if we didn't solve the problem, it's because you didn't give us enough power. In the same way, it's like you can't criticize us because you won't be able to do our jobs. That's not really what the government's designed to do. Like, they've lost the concept. The thread of serving the people apparently is gone. Now the government serves the government's interests, and particularly people that are in political office like Merrick Garland, they serve Merrick Garland's interests. And how dare you? Like, who are you to criticize him? He's the guy out there serving and has a protected detail of a dozen FBI agents and flies around in a private jet. So how dare you? It's one of the problems, I think, of giving these people all these perks for these jobs. They actually start thinking they're a lot better than you when they're just regular people.
Yeah.
And no one elected him to anything. Let's be real.
So in this, he claims the following. He says that there are false claims that the department is politicizing its work to somehow influence the outcome of an election. Such claims are often made by those who are themselves attempting to politicize the department's work to influence the outcome of an election. So when you hear Merrick Garland claim that, no, we're not politicizing our work, what's your reaction?
It's a lot like when someone says that we're unbiased journalists because we just tell you the facts. But what we always have to look a little bit deeper, the second layer is editorial bias. So you see the bias of what is prosecuted and what is not prosecuted. Really simple example of it, like the FACE Act. It's almost never prosecuted against people that are destroying churches or doing things in faith communities. It's always prosecuted about people who are praying outside of abortion clinics.
Yes.
So you go, is that political prosecution? We have the discretion to make the best case. You do, but we can see what you're doing when it's 125-4. It's very, very lopsided and one-sided. So they have this bias, and it looks, to somebody that wants to back them up like it's fair. It's only fair skin deep the minute you get into that sort of editorial bias, that selectivity of how we're going to do it. And when they talked about elections specifically, DOJ has been straightforward. They said we are not interested in election fraud. We're only interested in voter suppression. So when they're only interested in certain types of crimes that relate to elections and not others, they are doing that kind of bias. And they can act like it's not for all they want, but we know what they're doing.
Right, yeah, and they're bringing, of course, Jack Smith is trying to sprint all of these cases he's bringing against Trump before the election for a very explicit purpose. He's trying to influence the outcome of that election. And what you just referenced, I'm glad you brought up the media because it makes me think, this has been my career, your career in the FBI, my career in media. In journalism, we refer to what you just said as selection bias. That is the stories that you choose to report on. You may report on that particular story in a fair way. You may call everybody who's involved in it, but you chose to focus on that story to emphasize it to the audience for a reason. The Justice Department does the same thing. They have selection bias about the types of cases they actually take up.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of daylight right now between what the government narrative is and the the mainstream media narrative looks like when you've got op-eds being published ahead of a contempt vote, right? And then they're out there doing cover for the guy that works. Whatever happened to democracy dies in darkness and we hold the powerful to account? Like, that's not there anymore. So it's all about, do they have access to the people they want? Are they going to get the bylines they want? Are they going to get the sourcing they want? And you're spot on. Like, they're making decisions by what they cover and what they prosecute. We can all see them, though. That's the upside of the internet and mass media.
Yeah, and so the media and the FBI, unfortunately, working hand in glove to take down the powerless rather than to hold the powerful to account. Kyle Seraphin, thank you very much for your time, as always. Really appreciate your wisdom on this subject and so many other things as well. You can find Kyle at the Kyle Seraphin Podcast as well. Kyle, thank you very much, sir. Well, NFL great Tom Brady was just inducted into the New England Patriots Hall of Fame last night. And he gave a great speech. He gave a great speech on excellence, on hard work, and on why it's important for young men to play football. Take a listen to this. I want you to hear some of this audio. I was motivated by it.
I would encourage everyone to play football for the simple reason that it is hard. It's hard when you're young to wake up in the off season at 6 a.m. to go train and work out, knowing that all your friends are sleeping in and eating pancakes. It's hard when you're on your way to practice, weighed down with all your gear, and it's 90 degrees out and all the other kids are at the pool or at the beach, and your body is already completely exhausted from workouts in 2 days. It's hard to throw, catch, block, and tackle, and hit kids when they're way bigger and way more developed than you, only to go home that night bruised and battered and strained, but knowing you have to show up again the next day for just the chance to try again. But understand this, life is hard. No matter who you are, there are bumps and hits and bruises along the way. And my advice is to prepare yourself, because football lessons teach us that success and achievement come from overcoming adversity, and that team accomplishment far exceeds anyone's individual goals. To be successful at anything, the truth is you don't have to be special. You just have to be what most people aren't. Consistent, determined, and willing to work for it. No shortcuts. If you look at all my teammates here tonight, it would be impossible to find better examples of men who embody that work ethic, integrity, purpose, determination, and discipline that it takes to be a champion in life.
Pretty good. Pretty good. Motivating, for sure. And, physical discipline, athletic discipline leads to mental discipline. No question. Pretty cool to hear from one of the greatest to ever do it. I like going back and listening to these guys, some of their speeches. They have something to say. Tom Brady, Michael Jordan, his Hall of Fame speech, that was something else. Hey, tell you what, another great one's coming up right here on WMAL. Mark Levin is going to be with you in just moments. I'll be back with you tomorrow. I want to cover a little bit more of Hunter's baby mama, London Roberts. She's got a story to tell, and boy, is it crazy what's going on in her life.